You are listening to HOA Checkmate. She said Tao on site, and she meant me. You are about to get another email. That is what Vanessa Davis shouted at me while pointing at my car like it was evidence at a crime scene. I had my coffee cup in one hand and my work bag in the other, trying to leave for my shift at the warranty claims office, and she was standing in front of my vehicle with a tow truck idling 10 feet behind her. The driver, a guy in a high-vis vest with a tool bag slung over his shoulder, looked uncomfortable. Vanessa tapped her portable radio earpiece and said the hazard fee was non-refundable. I live in Bradenton, Florida, at a place called Lakeshore Landing Ridge Association, and I work as a home warranty claims rep, which means I read fine print for a living. That morning, I needed that skill more than ever. Vanessa is our neighborhood watch liaison, which is code for treating every resident like a suspect. She had blonde hair pulled back in a sleek low ponytail, a red light jacket with the hood up, and a pink baseball cap that somehow made her look both official and ridiculous. She carried a key ring with too many keys, and she jingled it constantly like it was a badge of authority. My car had a guest parking pass on the dashboard. I could see it right there through the windshield, printed and laminated, exactly where the HOA rules said it should be. Vanessa walked up to my driver's side window and tapped the glass with one knuckle. She said the pass was fake. I asked her what she meant. She said the color was wrong, the font was wrong, and the code did not match her system. I had gotten the pass from the management office 2 days earlier. I told her that. She jingled her keys and said I was making her case for her. The tow driver stepped forward and said he needed a signature. Vanessa handed him a clipboard. I asked to see the authorization. Vanessa said the authorization was the hazard notice she emailed me at 6 in the morning. I had not checked my email yet because I was trying to leave for work. She said that was my problem. The tow truck had amber strobe lights flashing, and the puddles on the pavement turned everything into a chaotic light show. It had rained overnight, and the air smelled like wet asphalt and exhaust. I told Vanessa I needed to see the notice before anyone touched my car. She pulled out her phone and showed me an email with my address in the subject line. The body of the email said my vehicle was parked in violation of guest parking protocol, and that enforcement action was authorized effective immediately. There was a fee schedule attached. Towing was $300. Storage at the impound yard was $75 per day. The hazard fee, whatever that was, added another $200. I asked what a hazard fee was. She said it covered the cost of processing fraudulent permits. I said the permit was not fraudulent. She said keep arguing, I was making her case for me. That line stuck with me. Keep arguing, you are making my case for me. It was the kind of thing someone says when they think they have already won. I let her think she had me cornered, because my trump card needed her to overreach. I did not know exactly what my trump card was yet, but I knew something was wrong with the way she was handling this. I work in claims. I know when someone is rushing a process to avoid scrutiny. The tow driver looked at me and said he was just doing his job. I asked him if he had done other jobs for the HOA. He nodded. I asked how many. He said too many, and he said it quietly, like he did not want Vanessa to hear. That told me everything. Vanessa was using this tow company as her personal enforcement arm, and the driver was tired of being part of sketchy situations. I made a mental note to talk to him later if I could. Vanessa walked around my car and took a photo of the guest pass through the windshield. Then she took a photo of my license plate. Then she crouched down and took a photo of my front tire. I asked what she was doing. She said she was documenting the violation for the board. I said there was no violation. She said the board would decide that, and in the meantime, my car was getting towed. The driver hooked a chain under my front bumper. I told him to stop. He looked at Vanessa. She told him to continue. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Vanessa immediately stepped in front of the camera and said I did not have permission to film her. I said we were in a public parking lot, and I had every right to document what was happening to my property. She said the parking lot was private HOA property and I was violating her privacy. I said that was not how the law works. She tapped her radio earpiece and said she was calling security. I did not know we had security, but apparently Vanessa had a direct line to whoever sat at the gatehouse. Within 2 minutes, A gate technician with a tool bag walked up the lane. He looked like he had been fixing a card reader at the entrance and got called over. He asked what was going on. Vanessa said I was being combative and obstructing a lawful tow. The gate tech looked at my car, looked at the guest pass on my dashboard, and said it looked fine to him. Vanessa said he was not qualified to make that determination. He shrugged and walked away. I saw him pull out his own phone and start texting someone. I hoped it was someone on the board who was not part of Vanessa's operation. The driver finished hooking the chain and started winching my front wheels off the ground. I asked where he was taking it. He said the impound yard on State Road 70, about 15 minutes away. I asked if I could follow him there and pay to get it back immediately. He said the yard was cash only, and the fees jumped every hour after the first 3. Vanessa smiled. She said that was the policy, and if I had a problem with it, I could take it up with the board at the next meeting. The next meeting was not for 2 weeks. I realized this was not about a guest pass. This was about control. Vanessa had been on my case since I moved in 6 months ago. I am a home warranty claims rep, which means I work from home most days and I keep weird hours. My schedule does not match the 9-to-5 rhythm of the neighborhood, and Vanessa treats anyone who does not fit her idea of normal like a problem waiting to happen. She had sent me 3 emails in the past 2 months about my trash cans being out 15 minutes past the pickup window, my garage door being open during the day, and my contractor parking in front of my house for 20 minutes while he gave me a quote on gutter repair. The tow truck pulled my car out of the space. Vanessa walked alongside it like she was escorting a criminal. I followed on foot, still holding my coffee cup like I had run outside in a panic, which I basically had. The driver took my car out through the main gate, and I watched it disappear down the road. Vanessa turned to me and said I had until midnight to resolve the issue or a lien would be filed against my property. I asked what she meant. She said the HOA had the right to place a lien for unpaid fees, and the fees included the tow, the storage, the hazard processing, and an enforcement surcharge I had never heard of. I went back to my unit and opened my laptop. I pulled up the HOA governing documents, all 83 pages, and started searching for anything about guest parking, permits, towing authorization, and lien procedures. I found the guest parking section. It said residents could request guest passes from the management office and that passes must be displayed on the dashboard. It did not say anything about color, font, or code verification. It did not say anything about hazard fees or enforcement surcharges. It did not say the HOA could authorize a tow without written notice, delivered at least 72 hours in advance. I called the management company. The woman who answered said she remembered me. I had been in 2 days ago to get the guest pass. I asked if there was any problem with the pass she gave me. She said no. It was a standard pass, printed from the current template. I asked if the template had changed recently. She said it had not changed in over a year. I asked if Vanessa Davis had the authority to declare a pass fraudulent. There was a long pause. She said Vanessa did not have unilateral authority, but Vanessa often acted like she did, and the board usually backed her up to avoid conflict. That was the moment I realized this was bigger than one bad tow. The board was letting Vanessa run enforcement like her personal fiefdom, and they were rubber stamping whatever she did because it was easier than reining her in. I asked the management rep if there was a record of tow authorizations. She said there should be, but Vanessa often bypassed the system and called the tow company directly. I asked if that was legal. She said it was a gray area and that I should consult an attorney if I wanted a definitive answer. I did not have time to consult an attorney. I had to get my car back before the fees compounded into something I could not afford. And I had to get to work because I am trying to keep my record clean for background checks at my job. The warranty company I work for does annual reviews, and any legal trouble, even civil stuff like unpaid HOA fees or liens, can trigger a secondary review that puts my employment at risk. Vanessa did not know that, but she did not need to. She just needed to make my life difficult enough that I would either pay up or move out. I grabbed my wallet and drove my partner's car to the impound yard. The place was a chain-link fortress with a gravel lot and a portable office trailer that looked like it had been there since the 90s. A guy in a stained shirt sat behind a plexiglass window. I told him I was there to pick up my car. He asked for the ticket number. I did not have a ticket number. He said I needed the authorization code from the HOA. I said the HOA did not give me an authorization code. He shrugged and said I could not get the car without it. I called Vanessa. She did not pick up. I called the management office. They said they would try to reach Vanessa and get back to me. I sat in the gravel lot for 40 minutes. The impound guy came out and said my car was in Bay 3 and that the fee was now $375 because the first hour had expired. I asked how storage fees could jump that fast. He said it was in the contract with the HOA. I said I did not sign a contract. He said the HOA did, and as a resident, I was bound by it. I asked to see the contract. He went back into the trailer and came out with a binder. Inside was a one-page agreement between Lakeshore Landing Ridge Association and the tow company. It was signed by the HOA president, dated 8 months ago, and it included a fee schedule that escalated every hour for the first 6 hours. After that, it was a flat $75 per day. I took a photo of the agreement with my phone. The impound guy said I was not allowed to do that. I said I already did it. The management office finally called me back. They said Vanessa had provided the authorization code and that I could retrieve my car once I paid the fees. I asked if they had reviewed the validity of the tow. They said that was not their role. I asked whose role it was. They said the board's. I asked when the board met next. They said 2 weeks from Thursday. I said that was unacceptable. They said I could file a dispute in writing and the board would respond within 10 business days. I asked what I was supposed to do in the meantime. They said I could pay the fees and request reimbursement if the board ruled in my favor. I paid $375 in cash. The impound guy gave me a receipt and pointed to Bay 3. My car was parked between a rusted pickup and a sedan with a smashed windshield. The bright yellow tire clamp was still on the front wheel. I asked why. The impound guy said the clamp was HOA property, and I had to get Vanessa to remove it. I called Vanessa again. She picked up this time. I told her I had paid the fees and I needed her to remove the clamp. She said she would come by when she had time. I asked when that would be. She said it depended on her schedule. I said I needed my car now. She said I should have thought of that before I parked illegally. I sat in the driver's seat with a tire clamp on my wheel, unable to drive in an impound lot that smelled like motor oil and regret. I called my partner and explained the situation. They said it sounded like Vanessa was retaliating. I said it felt that way. They said I should document everything and consider talking to a lawyer. I said I was already documenting, and a lawyer was on my list, but first I needed to get the clamp off my car so I could go to work. Vanessa showed up an hour later. She had the key ring with too many keys jangling from her hand. She did not apologize. She did not acknowledge the absurdity of the situation. She just crouched down, unlocked the clamp, and carried it back to her car like it was a trophy. I asked her why she had done this. She said, "You do not build to my standard. You pay to my standard." It was a phrase she had used before, back when she cited me for leaving my garage door open. It was her way of saying she was the arbiter of what was acceptable in the neighborhood, and if I did not meet her expectations, I would pay the price. I drove home. I was 3 hours late for work. I logged in and sent an apologetic message to my supervisor explaining that I had a personal emergency. He said it was fine, but asked me to make up the hours over the weekend. I said I would. Then I opened a new browser tab and started digging into HOA law in Florida. I found the Florida Homeowners Association Act. I found sections on meeting procedures, voting requirements, lien processes, and enforcement authority. I found a section that said any rule change or fee addition required a vote by the board with a quorum present, and that quorum was defined as a majority of board members. I pulled up the HOA board roster. There were 5 members. Vanessa was listed as Neighborhood Watch Liaison, which was not a board position. The president was a man named Gerald. The vice president was a woman named Trish. The other 3 were listed as at-large members. I started looking through the meeting minutes posted on the HOA website. The minutes were sparse, often just a few sentences summarizing votes. I found the meeting where the tow contract was approved. It was dated 8 months ago. The minutes said the motion passed unanimously. But the attendance record listed only 3 board members present: Gerald, Trish, and one at-large member. That was not a quorum. I let her think I was cornered, because my trump card needed her to overreach. And she was overreaching constantly. Every email, every phone call, every escalation was another piece of evidence that she was operating outside the rules. I started saving everything. I saved the emails. I saved the tow receipt. I saved the impound contract. I saved the meeting minutes. I saved the HOA governing documents with the sections highlighted. I created a folder on my desktop labeled Lakeshore Evidence, and I backed it up to the cloud. 2 days later, I got another email from Vanessa. The subject line said follow-up enforcement action. The body said that during her review of my property, she had identified additional violations, including a contractor vehicle parked in front of my unit without a permit, an unapproved exterior modification to my front door, and improper storage of a trash receptacle. Each violation carried a $50 fine. The email included photos. The contractor vehicle was my gutter guy, who had been there for 20 minutes 3 weeks ago. The exterior modification was a doorbell camera I had installed 6 months ago. The trash receptacle was my garbage can, which I had moved to the side of my house after Vanessa complained about it being visible from the street. I replied and asked for the specific rule citations for each violation. Vanessa responded within 10 minutes. She said the rules were in the architectural guidelines and the parking policy, and that I should have reviewed them before moving in. I replied and said I had reviewed them, and none of the items she cited were violations according to the documents I had. She said the documents had been updated, and that I was responsible for staying current. I asked when the updates had been made. She said that was confidential board business. I called the management office again. I asked if the architectural guidelines or parking policy had been updated recently. The woman I spoke to said no. The last update was over 2 years ago. I asked if Vanessa had the authority to issue fines unilaterally. She said no. Fines had to be approved by the board after a hearing. I asked if I had been notified of a hearing. She checked the records and said no. I asked if the fines Vanessa was threatening were valid. She said probably not, but I would need to dispute them formally. I drafted a formal dispute letter. I cited the Florida Homeowners Association Act. I cited the HOA governing documents. I cited the lack of a hearing. I cited the lack of valid rule updates. I requested a full accounting of all fees and fines, copies of all notices, and a hearing before the board. I sent it via certified mail to the management office and copied the board president and vice president. I kept the tracking number. Vanessa called me the next day. She said I was being difficult. I said I was following the process. She said the process was designed to protect the community, not to give residents a loophole to avoid accountability. I said accountability worked both ways. She said I was making her job harder. I said her job was to enforce the rules, not to invent them. She hung up. The board president, Gerald, called me 2 hours later. He said he had received my letter and that he wanted to resolve the situation amicably. I said I appreciated that. He said Vanessa was a dedicated volunteer and that sometimes her enthusiasm led to misunderstandings. I said this was not a misunderstanding, this was a pattern of improper enforcement and retaliation. He said retaliation was a strong word. I said I had documentation. He paused. He said he would look into it and get back to me. A week passed. I heard nothing from Gerald. I heard nothing from the board. But I got 3 more emails from Vanessa. One said I had missed a mandatory landscaping inspection and that my yard was out of compliance. One said my vehicle registration sticker was expired and that unregistered vehicles were prohibited. One said I had violated the guest parking policy again, even though I had not had any guests. I checked my registration sticker. It was valid through next year. I checked my landscaping. It was identical to every other unit on my street. I checked the guest parking log. There was no record of a violation. I replied to each email with a detailed rebuttal and a copy of the relevant documents proving there was no violation. Vanessa did not respond. Instead, I got a notice from the management office saying that a lien had been filed against my property for unpaid fines totaling $850. The notice included the original hazard fee, the 3 follow-up fines, and a new charge called an enforcement surcharge that I had never seen before. The notice said I had 30 days to pay, or the HOA would initiate foreclosure proceedings. That was the escalation I needed. I called a real estate attorney that afternoon. I explained the situation. She said it sounded like the HOA was violating multiple provisions of Florida law. She said the lien was almost certainly invalid because I had not been given proper notice, there had been no hearing, and the fines themselves appeared to be unsupported. She said she could file a motion to dissolve the lien and sue the HOA for improper enforcement and retaliation. I asked how much it would cost. She said $5,000 up front. I did not have $5,000. I asked if there were other options. She said I could represent myself in small claims court, but she would not recommend it, because HOAs often have attorneys on retainer and they would bury me in procedural motions. She said my best bet was to force the HOA to follow its own rules and hope that the board would back down when faced with the evidence. She said most HOA disputes ended in settlement once the board realized they were exposed to liability. I asked what kind of liability. She said wrongful lien, improper enforcement, emotional distress, and retaliation. She said if I could prove the HOA knowingly violated the law, I could recover attorney fees and damages. I left her office with a plan. I was going to force the board to hold a hearing. I was going to present my evidence. I was going to make them admit on the record that Vanessa had overstepped. And I was going to use the tow contract I had photographed at the impound yard to show that the enforcement mechanism was invalid, because the vote that approved it did not have a quorum. I submitted a formal request for a hearing. Florida law required the board to schedule it within 30 days. The management office confirmed receipt and said the hearing would be held at the clubhouse on a Tuesday evening, 2 weeks out. I marked the date on my calendar. Then I went back through every email, every notice, every receipt, and every document I had collected. I organized them into a timeline. I printed everything. I put it in a 3-ring binder with tabs. I made copies. The night before the hearing, I got an email from Vanessa. The subject line said settlement offer. The body said that if I paid $500, the HOA would drop all outstanding fines and remove the lien. The email said this was a one-time offer, and that if I declined, the full amount would remain due and the foreclosure process would continue. I did not reply. The hearing was scheduled for 7 in the evening. I arrived at 6:30. The clubhouse was a bland room with folding tables and metal chairs. The board sat at a table in the front. Gerald was there, along with Trish and 2 of the at-large members. Vanessa sat off to the side with a clipboard and her keyring. There were about 10 other residents in the audience, most of them looking annoyed that they had been dragged to a meeting on a weeknight. Gerald called the meeting to order. He said the purpose of the hearing was to review my dispute of the fines and lien. He asked me to present my case. I stood up and walked to the front. I opened my binder and laid out the timeline. I started with the guest pass and the tow. I showed the pass I had been given by the management office. I showed the email from Vanessa claiming it was fraudulent. I showed the management rep's confirmation that the pass was valid. I showed the tow receipt with the escalating fees. I showed the impound contract with the fee schedule. Then I showed the meeting minutes from 8 months ago. I pointed to the attendance record. I said the motion to approve the tow contract had passed with only 3 board members present, which was not a quorum under the HOA governing documents. I said that made the contract invalid. I said every tow authorized under that contract was improper. I said every fee charged under that contract was unenforceable. Gerald looked at Trish. Trish looked at the at-large members. One of them said he did not remember that vote. Another said she had not been present. Vanessa stood up and said the vote was valid because the board had delegated enforcement authority to a subcommittee. I asked what subcommittee. She said the Safety and Compliance Subcommittee. I asked who was on that subcommittee. She said she was. I asked who else. She did not answer. I pulled out another document from my binder. It was the section of the HOA governing documents that described committees. It said all committees had to be approved by board vote and had to consist of at least 3 members. I asked if the Safety and Compliance Subcommittee had been approved by board vote. Gerald said he was not aware of any such vote. I asked Vanessa if she had documentation. She said it was in the archives. I asked where the archives were. She said the management office. I asked the management rep who was sitting in the back if there was a record of the subcommittee. She said she would have to check. Gerald asked for a 5-minute recess. The board huddled in a corner. Vanessa joined them. I sat down and waited. One of the residents in the audience leaned over and whispered that Vanessa had towed her car 6 months ago for the same reason, and that she had paid the fees because she did not know how to fight it. I asked if she had documentation. She said she had the receipt. I gave her my email address and told her to send it to me. The board came back. Gerald said they needed more time to review the records and that the hearing would be continued to the following month. I said that was unacceptable. I said Florida law required a decision within 30 days of the request. Gerald said the board was acting in good faith. I said good faith did not suspend statutory deadlines. Trish said they could make a preliminary ruling. Gerald looked uncomfortable. He said the board was prepared to remove the lien pending further review. I said that was not enough. I said I wanted the fines dismissed, the tow fees refunded, and a written acknowledgement that the enforcement actions were improper. Vanessa stood up and said I was being unreasonable. I said I was being thorough. She said I was wasting everyone's time. I said the board had wasted my time by allowing her to operate without oversight. Gerald told Vanessa to sit down. She did, but she looked furious. One of the at-large members said she wanted to see the evidence I had mentioned about the tow contract quorum. I handed her the binder. She flipped through the pages. She asked Gerald if he had been aware that the vote did not have a quorum. He said he did not remember the specifics. She said this was a serious problem. She said if the contract was invalid, the HOA could be liable for every tow that had been authorized under it. Gerald turned pale. Vanessa said the contract was not invalid, it was just a procedural oversight. The at-large member said procedural oversights had legal consequences. She said the board needed to consult with the HOA attorney immediately. Gerald said he would set up a call. Trish said the board should suspend all enforcement actions until the attorney reviewed the situation. Gerald agreed. I asked if that meant my fines were dismissed. Gerald said provisionally yes. I asked if the lien would be removed. He said yes. I asked if I would be refunded for the tow fees. He paused. He said the board would discuss reimbursement and notify me of their decision. I said I wanted the decision in writing within 10 business days. He said that was reasonable. Vanessa stood up and walked out of the room. The key ring jangled one last time as the door slammed shut. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, mostly procedural cleanup. Gerald scheduled a follow-up meeting for the next month and said all residents would be notified. The audience started to file out. The woman who had whispered to me earlier came up and thanked me. She said she was going to file her own dispute. I drove home feeling like I had won something, but I knew it was not over. Boards do not like being challenged, and Vanessa was not the type to back down quietly. I expected retaliation. I expected more emails, more notices, more invented violations. But I also knew I had the upper hand now. I had forced the board to admit there was a problem, and I had documentation of everything. 2 days later, I got an email from the management office. The lien had been removed. The fines had been dismissed. The board had voted to refund my tow fees, minus a $50 administrative charge. I replied and said the administrative charge was not in the original fee schedule and that I expected a full refund. They responded and said the board had approved the charge at the follow-up meeting. I replied and said I had not been notified of a follow-up meeting and that any vote taken without proper notice was invalid. They did not respond. I filed a complaint with the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation, which oversees HOAs in the state. I included copies of all my documents. I cited the quorum violation, the improper lien, the lack of hearings, and the retaliatory enforcement. The complaint was assigned a case number, and I was told an investigator would review it. 3 weeks later, I got a call from Gerald. He said the board had received a notice from the state and that they were taking the matter seriously. He said the board had voted to dissolve the Safety and Compliance Subcommittee and to require all enforcement actions to be approved by a majority vote of the board. He said Vanessa had been removed from her role as Neighborhood Watch Liaison. He said the HOA attorney had reviewed the tow contract and determined that it needed to be revoted with a proper quorum, which had been done at the most recent meeting. If you are enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of HOA justice. I asked about my full refund. Gerald said the board had agreed to refund the entire tow fee without the administrative charge. I asked when I would receive it. He said the check would be mailed within 10 business days. I asked if there was anything else. He said the board wanted to put this matter behind them and move forward with a fresh start. I said I appreciated that, but I would be watching closely to make sure the new enforcement procedures were followed. The check arrived 9 days later. I deposited it. Then I got an email from Vanessa. The subject line said personal message. The body said she was sorry for the way things had gone, and that she had only been trying to protect the neighborhood. She said she hoped we could move past this. I did not reply. A week after that, I was leaving for work when I saw Vanessa in the parking lot. She was talking to the gate technician, the same guy who had walked up during the original tow. She did not have her clipboard or her keyring. She looked smaller, deflated. She saw me and looked away. The gate tech caught my eye and gave me a subtle nod, like he was glad someone had finally pushed back. I got in my car and drove to the office. My supervisor asked how things were going. I said things were good. He said he had noticed I seemed less stressed lately. I said I had resolved a personal issue. He said he was glad to hear it. I did not tell him the details. Some battles are private, even when you win. That night, I got an email from the woman who had sat in the audience at the hearing. She said she had filed her dispute and that the board had refunded her tow fees as well. She said 3 other residents had come forward with similar stories and that the state investigator was now looking into a pattern of improper enforcement. She said the board was panicking because the HOA attorney had told them they could be personally liable if the investigator found evidence of knowing violations. The next board meeting was packed. Over 30 residents showed up. Gerald opened the meeting by announcing that the board had hired a new management company and that all enforcement procedures were being reviewed and updated. He said the HOA was committed to transparency and accountability. He said Vanessa was no longer involved in any enforcement capacity. One resident asked if Vanessa was still living in the neighborhood. Gerald said yes, but she was no longer in a leadership role of any kind. Trish stood up and said the board wanted to formally apologize to any residents who had been subjected to improper enforcement. She said the board had not been aware of the extent of the problem until I had brought it to their attention. She said the board was taking steps to ensure it did not happen again. She sat down. The room was silent for a moment. Then someone started clapping. It was the woman who had emailed me. Others joined in. Gerald looked relieved. After the meeting, I walked out to my car. The gate tech was standing by the entrance, adjusting a card reader. He waved me over. He said he wanted to thank me. I asked why. He said he had been documenting Vanessa's behavior for months because he thought something was wrong, but he did not know what to do with the information. He said when I stood up at the hearing, it gave him the courage to come forward. He said he had given the board a log of every time Vanessa had called the tow company without proper authorization. He said the log showed over 40 incidents in the past year. I asked what happened to the log. He said the board had given it to the state investigator. He said the investigator had subpoenaed the tow company's records and found that Vanessa had been receiving a referral fee for every tow she authorized. I asked how much. He said $50 per tow. I did the math. Over 40 tows, that was $2,000. He said the investigator was treating it as a kickback scheme and that Vanessa could face criminal charges. I went home and opened my laptop. I searched for news about HOA enforcement fraud in Florida. I found several cases where board members or volunteers had been prosecuted for taking kickbacks from vendors. I found one case where an HOA president had been sentenced to 2 years in prison for a similar scheme. I realized Vanessa had not just been overzealous. She had been running a scam. 2 months later, I got a letter from the state investigator. It said the investigation had been completed and that the findings had been referred to the local prosecutor. It said the HOA had been found in violation of multiple provisions of Florida law and that the board had agreed to implement corrective measures. It said individual residents who had been affected by improper enforcement could file civil claims for damages. It included a case number and contact information for a victim advocate. I called the victim advocate. She said over 20 residents had come forward with complaints. She said the prosecutor was considering charges against Vanessa for fraud and against the board for negligence. She said the HOA had agreed to settle with affected residents rather than face a class action lawsuit. She said I would receive a settlement offer within 30 days. The settlement offer arrived 3 weeks later. The HOA agreed to pay me $5,000 for improper enforcement, emotional distress, and reimbursement of costs. The offer included a clause requiring me to sign a non-disclosure agreement. I called the real estate attorney I had consulted earlier. She said the settlement was reasonable and that the NDA was standard. She said I could negotiate for more, but it would take time and legal fees. I decided to accept the offer. I signed the agreement and received the check 2 weeks later. The board held a special meeting to announce the results of the state investigation. Gerald read a statement saying the board accepted full responsibility for failing to oversee enforcement procedures. He said the HOA would pay my filing fees to end the fight, which was part of the state-mandated corrective plan. He said the tow contract had been terminated, and a new vendor had been selected with stricter oversight. He said all enforcement actions would now require board approval, and that residents would have the right to a hearing before any fines or liens were imposed. Vanessa did not attend the meeting. I heard from the gate tech that she had moved out of the neighborhood 2 weeks earlier. He said she had sold her unit and left without telling anyone. He said the prosecutor had filed charges, but Vanessa had not been arrested yet because they were still building the case. I ran into Trish at the mailboxes a few days later. She stopped and asked how I was doing. I said I was fine. She said the board appreciated the way I had handled the situation. She said it had been a wake-up call for everyone. I said I hoped the new procedures would prevent it from happening again. She said the board was committed to making sure they did. She paused, then said Vanessa had called her the night before she moved out. I asked what Vanessa had said. Trish said Vanessa had blamed me for ruining her reputation. I said I had only asked the board to follow its own rules. Trish said she knew that, and she was sorry it had taken so long for the board to see what was happening. A few weeks later, I got a call from the prosecutor's office. They said Vanessa had been arrested and charged with fraud and theft by deception. They said the tow company owner had also been charged as a co-conspirator. They said the case would go to trial unless Vanessa took a plea deal. They asked if I would be willing to testify. I said yes. The trial never happened. Vanessa took a plea deal 3 months later. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of fraud and was sentenced to probation, restitution, and community service. The tow company owner pleaded guilty to similar charges and lost his business license. The prosecutor issued a press release saying the case was an example of how HOA enforcement could be abused, and that residents should always document improper actions and report them to the state. Life in the neighborhood settled into a new normal. The board implemented the corrective measures. Enforcement became transparent. Residents started attending meetings and asking questions. The new management company was responsive and professional. I stopped getting harassing emails. My car stayed in its assigned spot without incident. The guest pass system was simplified, and the new passes were accepted without drama. I still see the gate tech occasionally. He told me he got a raise because the new management company valued his honesty. He said the board had thanked him for coming forward with the log. He said he felt like the neighborhood was a better place now. I agreed. One afternoon, I was walking to my car when I saw a moving truck parked in front of Vanessa's old unit. A young couple was unloading boxes. The woman waved at me. I waved back. She asked if I lived nearby. I said yes. She said they were excited to move in. She said the HOA seemed really organized and professional. I smiled and said it had not always been that way, but things had improved. She asked what I meant. I said it was a long story. She said maybe I could tell her sometime. I said maybe. The board held an election 6 months later. Gerald chose not to run for re-election. Trish ran for president and won. She appointed new committee chairs and implemented term limits for board members. She said the goal was to prevent any one person from consolidating too much power. She said the HOA had learned a hard lesson and was determined not to repeat it. I ran into the woman from the hearing at the grocery store. She said she had received her settlement check and used it to install a security camera system. She said she was documenting everything now, just in case. I said that was smart. She said I had inspired her to stand up for herself. I said I was just following the rules. She said that was exactly the point. The prosecutor called me a year after the plea deal. He said Vanessa had completed her probation and that the case was officially closed. He said restitution had been paid in full to all affected residents. He said the case had led to new legislation requiring HOAs to disclose vendor relationships and prohibiting referral fees. He said it was a small victory, but it would help prevent similar schemes in the future. I got an email from the state investigator thanking me for my cooperation. She said my documentation had been critical to building the case. She said without residents willing to come forward, enforcement fraud would continue unchecked. She said I had made a difference. I printed the email and put it in the binder with all the other documents. I labeled the binder Lakeshore Resolved and put it on a shelf. The funny karma moment came about a year after everything settled. The board was reviewing old complaints as part of the Transparency Initiative, and someone found a stack of emails that Vanessa had sent to the management office over the years. The emails were all complaints about other residents, dozens of them, filed for trivial reasons. The board published a summary in the monthly newsletter. The summary noted that Vanessa had filed more complaints than any other resident in the history of the HOA, and that most of the complaints had been found to be without merit. The newsletter included a line that said, Vanessa claimed that nobody complained about her enforcement methods, but the records tell a different story, end quote. It was a small detail, but it was satisfying to see her narrative dismantled by her own paperwork. The HOA attorney sent a letter to all affected residents as part of the settlement. The letter included a policy clarification that destroyed Karen's favorite tactic. It said enforcement actions could not be based on subjective judgments or personal standards, and that all violations must be clearly defined in the governing documents with objective criteria. It said residents had the right to challenge any enforcement action, and that the burden of proof was on the HOA. It was exactly the kind of policy that would have prevented Vanessa from targeting me in the first place. Karen got corrected by the HOA attorney in plain language during a meeting where the board reviewed the new enforcement procedures. The attorney stood up and said that volunteers do not have enforcement authority, that only the board can authorize fines or liens, and that any action taken outside the proper procedure is invalid and exposes the HOA to liability. He looked directly at the section where Vanessa used to sit, even though she was long gone, and said that enthusiasm is not a substitute for following the rules. The room was silent. It was the official repudiation she had avoided for years. The HOA paid my filing fees to end the fight, as Gerald had announced. They also paid the filing fees for the other residents who had come forward. It was part of the settlement with the state, and it was a public acknowledgement that the board had failed in its oversight. The checks were issued with a cover letter that apologized for the improper enforcement and committed to doing better. It was not everything I wanted, but it was enough. I still live in the neighborhood. My car parks in its assigned spot. My guest pass works when I have visitors. My doorbell camera stays on my front door. My trash can sits where it needs to sit. I go to work, I come home, and I do not get harassing emails. The board meetings are boring now, which is exactly how they should be. Enforcement is fair and transparent. The rules are clear. Life is normal. Sometimes I think about Vanessa. I wonder if she learned anything from the experience. I wonder if she feels remorse, or if she still thinks she was right and everyone else was wrong. I do not have answers to those questions, and I do not need them. What I needed was accountability, and I got it. What I needed was a system that worked, and now it does. The neighborhood feels different now. People talk more openly. They ask questions. They do not assume that the board knows best or that enforcement is always justified. There is a sense of ownership, a feeling that residents have a say in how things are run. It is a small shift, but it matters. I ran into the tow truck driver a few months ago at a gas station. He remembered me. He said he had stopped taking calls from HOAs after the Vanessa case. He said the whole thing had made him realize he was being used as a tool for harassment, and he did not want any part of it. He said he wished he had spoken up sooner. I said he had spoken up when it mattered, and that was enough. The gate tech retired last year. On his last day, he stopped by my unit and thanked me again for standing up to Vanessa. He said it had been one of the most stressful periods of his career, and he was glad it had ended the way it did. I thanked him for his help. He said he was just doing his job. I said his job had made a difference. I still keep the binder on the shelf. I do not look at it often, but it is there if I need it. It is a reminder that documentation matters, that persistence pays off, and that even when the system feels stacked against you, there are ways to fight back within the rules. It is a reminder that accountability is possible, even in an HOA. The new board president, Trish, asked me to serve on the compliance committee last year. I declined. I said I appreciated the offer, but I did not want a leadership role. She said she understood. She said the door was always open if I changed my mind. I said I would keep that in mind. For now, I am content to be a resident, to follow the rules, and to speak up when something is wrong. That is enough. Catch you next time, and I appreciate you hanging out with me today.